another Can We Talk Now? And today is a really, really important, and it's such an important day for me and for this podcast, because we're commemorating something that happened 1 year ago. Next on the 30th. When is that? Next Tuesday, the 30th. We're commemorating the passing of the beautiful little angel that was Abigail. So what I was privileged to be part of that story towards the end, particularly when I was very close with Deborah. We were in contact all the time, and how it ended, Deborah was so tranquil, and she was accepting the fate after what was such a tragic 17-year battle to fighting for the rights for oils and things like that. So the person who really was instrumental in making life ultimately bearable and bringing such a sweet end to that too short life that was Abby. And one thing Deborah said in the interview, which you can find I'll put it, all links will be regarding this call will be in the description, but you'll find that call I had with Deborah regarding Abby back in the day, and you'll find it, the links, everything will be in the description. But for now, the man that was instrumental in making life plausible, and that gave a beautiful end to what was a proper tragic instance. And I want to introduce him officially, because he's a serious dude. Yeah, he's far too humble. But I'm so happy to have you. I'm very conscious of your time, Dr. Joe Rosado.
Stephen, you want to make me cry before we get started? What's wrong with you?
Okay.
I'm a softie.
Okay, I'm going for the introduction. So hold on a second. Dr. Joe Rosado is a multiple award-winning doctor, a best-selling author, an educator, and a highly coveted professional speaker, and an MBA in care management with over 40 years experience in healthcare. So this is a proper, we have a proper qualified person. So for all the physicians, I will be putting this out to all you physicians out there and prescribers in the Irish medical system. So we've got a guy that has massive experience. So I want to get to, I love the idea of kind of integrative medicine. Can you tell me how you first got into that end of it and how that manifests in your practice?
Well, I am a unicorn, as I tell many people when I'm interviewed, because I am the rare individual. I started literally from the ground up. I started as a certified nurse's aide orderly at the age of 16. Then I moved on and became an emergency medical technician working on an ambulance and in post-anesthesia care units. I progressed on and became a paramedic, continuing on in the ambulance service, dealing with first responding emergencies on the street. Wherever emergencies happened outside of the hospital, I was the man. It was 911 in our area. Following that, I became a heart catheterization lab technician. Say that 10 times fast. And I did that for about 2 years. Was involved in a very, very serious automobile accident where I sustained a fracture in my spine. And I was so impressed with the chiropractor that worked with me that I decided not to go to medical school at that time and went on to chiropractic school in the state of Georgia here in the United States. Practiced chiropractic for 5 years, and then got frustrated with the limited scope of practice because of a child that was suffering with status epilepticus. I believe, now that I have more knowledge and understanding, I believe she may have suffered with Dravet's or Lennox Gastaut, which is very similar to Abby's situation, and many of the patients that I manage, not only in the US, but abroad. Even though I'm not licensed abroad, I am awarded special permission to manage and treat people outside of the United States because, as in Abby's case, there were no physicians that were able to address the dosing for Abby with the cannabis that she was able to obtain from Amsterdam, I believe it was. And so, yes, the program existed, but there were no physicians that felt comfortable enough to manage the dosing and manage the medications that Abby was on at the time. And so, letting, a disclaimer that I'm not licensed all over the world, but I do get special permissions from either the boards of medicine or the ministries of health or even the hospitals to award me special permission just to address that specific patient, that specific condition. Um, that being said, I went on to medical school. I got my medical degree, and then that's how I became, to integrate. One other thing that makes me a unicorn is that I learned about the endocannabinoid system in medical school. While in
Yeah.
pharmacology, I was the toxicology section of pharmacology. We were discussing and addressing uh, drugs of abuse. And of course, the first one that they always mention is cannabis because that is the gateway drug. Not, but that's common mainstream thought processes. As one of our former presidents would say, fake news. Anyway, that's my political plug. We're moving on. But we learned about the endocannabinoid system, about the cannabinoid receptors, and the fact that cannabis did work on the receptors and that we did produce cannabis. But then immediately they changed the language and the conversation to how it's a gateway drug and how it's bad. That evening, I went home, went into my pharmacology book, and looked up cannabis sativa. And the one line that struck me the hardest was the one that read as follows: it causes psychological dependence, not physiological dependence. Well, most drugs, most medications cause a physiological dependence. You start with a little bit and eventually you need more and more and more to accomplish the same. And that's how addiction progresses. With cannabis, it's more of a psychological dependence. People believe that they need to be on cannabis, and so they become dependent on it psychologically. But there's no physiological dependence. There's the possibility of becoming addicted to cannabis is virtually impossible. And so I put that in my toolbox and just left it there. Fast forward to 2010 when cannabis became legal.
Could I interject there? Sorry,
Sure.
just on the because I'm just wondering about like I've been read that the percentage of training in colleges in America, in the US, is still only 12% that is teaching the endocannabinoid system. Could it still be that low?
The last bit of literature that I read, it was less than 10%. So 10% or less. So 12%, you're about right. Yes.
Wow.
So less than 10%. And they did a survey. They've done surveys of physicians that were either getting ready to graduate medical school, go on into their specialty training, their residencies, and individuals that were at the end of their residency training. And they were asked, how comfortable do you feel about managing and treating patients with cannabis? And the resounding answer was no. 90% said no, they were not prepared to manage or treat individuals with cannabis simply because they didn't have the training, simply because they didn't have the understanding. And the stamp answer that they give is, well, there's not enough research, there's not enough data. Well, that's because there's not enough research or data in this country. That doesn't mean that there's not enough research or data outside of the United States. One of the youngest countries in the world is supposed to have the gold standard. Let's look to Israel, where all of the research and studies began from the 40s, 1940s, 1950s. Professor Raphael Mechoulam, may he rest in peace, who dedicated practically his entire life to the studying and research of that. The gentleman that wrote the foreword to my book, Hope in Healing the Case for Cannabis, which this week will be 5 years old. My book turns 5 this week. In fact, it came out 4/20. That was not an accident. That was intentional. But the beauty of it was on 4/19, it had already been ranked #1 in epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, and alternative medicine on Amazon. So one day before it was available, it was already a #1 bestseller in the US and Amazon. And so I'm very proud of that because this week it turns 5. It's my youngest child, but getting onto my trajectory in cannabis in 2010 when it became medically legal in the state of Arizona, one of my best friends reached out to me and said, "Look, the law here reads that I have to have a medical doctor be my medical director for me to be able to have a dispensary." I said, "Absolutely, sign me up." Well, things did not turn out as planned, and so we had to table that. Waited 4 more years until 2014 in the state of Florida. A gentleman by the name of John Morgan, a very popular and influential politician and attorney, uh, invested his own money in the campaign to decriminalize cannabis in the state of Florida. We had no laws in the books. We had no product. No one was growing it legally. And so I reached out to him via email stating, "I'm a physician, I'm an advocate. How do I get involved?" 24 hours later, I was speaking to the campaign manager, and a week later, I was on the Bureau of Speakers traveling the state of Florida, proponing and advocating for the amendment, which was at that time Amendment 2. Um, it wasn't until June of 2014 that we actually had uh, laws in the books. It was called the Compassionate Care Act, which lacked any compassion, and I'll explain why. It only allowed the use of low THC for 4 diagnoses. Those 4 diagnoses were epilepsy, chronic conditions that cause seizures, chronic conditions that cause muscle spasms, and cancer. And it was a low THC, high CBD product. And in that Compassionate Care Act law, they mandated that we have a 90-day doctor-patient relationship before I, as a physician, could make the recommendation. That means or meant that if you came to my office, I never met you before, you and I had to establish a 90-day relationship before I could award you and recommend a plant. However, I could write a prescription for synthetic THC, give it to you, and within 45 minutes, you would have it in your possession. What kind of compassion was that? 2014, the law did not pass, so we had to wait until 2016. So we went back to the drawing board, which was to my benefit, truthfully, because it allowed me the opportunity to learn more about the plant, about the recommending, about the dosing. Because although I learned about the endocannabinoid system in medical school, I had no understanding or knowledge of how to use it professionally.
Right.
And so, notice I said professionally. And so I reached out to individuals that had been doing it far longer than myself, that were in states where there had been programs that existed far longer than those in the state of Florida. And I shadowed these. I read everything I could get my hands on. I read everything that Ms. Shulam had published, everything Lumir Hanush had published, and just became more knowledgeable theoretically, but obviously not, more academic, but not
Yeah,
clinical.
practically.
Yeah, not practical at all. And so in 2016, June of 2016, they added what was called the Right to Try Act, which allowed us to recommend actual THC to individuals that we had a terminal condition. And the state defined a terminal condition as a condition that if for 1 year we did nothing for the individual, they would die within that year. That's what was coined a terminal condition. And they allowed that to happen, which was a blessing because my first patient was a 35-year-old female who had a stage 3 astrocytoma of the frontal lobe. Okay, so that's medical. In layman's term, she had a tumor, a malignant tumor in the front portion of her brain. She had her brain, her skull opened, and as much as they could remove of the tumor, they were able to remove, but there was a portion of the tumor that was still in a very delicate area in her brain. They could not remove it. And so she found me because at that time there were less than 30 doctors in the state of Florida that were certified to recommend cannabis. I was living in the county and practicing in the county where she resided in. She found me, came into the office. We began the 90-day establishment of doctor-patient relationship. She started with me in March of 2016. In August of 2016, we actually had product available. She was the first in the greater Central Florida area to receive low THC and then eventually high THC in the RSO form, the Rick Simpson oil or FICO, where she was able to obtain pure as you can cannabis. And then 3 months later, I was the first to recommend cannabis to a child, also a terminally ill child. He was 15, had a very aggressive tumor of the head and neck. The tumor had eaten his jaw, his cheekbone, his eye socket, his eyeball. He would wear an eye patch. It had penetrated his skull, was into his brain, and was already on a morphine pump and was on palliative care. He was on hospice in the state of Florida, but because he's a child, hospice allowed, or palliative care allowed for him to be treated. If he had been an adult, he would not be allowed to be treated because that's the stipulation with palliative care in this state. And so Juju was able to receive cannabis. We were able to reduce the dosing of his morphine from 16 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours to 8 milligrams within 30 days. So we dropped it by 50%. He now was no longer sitting or laying in his hospital bed in his bedroom, drooling, looking at his crotch, because that's what he was. He was so overly medicated. He was asking his mother to make him rice, beans, and meat because he was of Puerto Rican descent, and that's our staple diet, rice and beans and some type of meat. He was in the living room enjoying the company of his family. He was the best man at his brother's wedding. He danced with his sister at his brother's wedding. And yes, although he passed the following year in February, those months from November of 2016 to February of 2017, the memory of the family and his quality of life will forever be impregnated in their brains, very similar to Deborah and Abby. Those last years and months leading to her transition, the fact that and I'll try to do this without losing it, but Deborah told me and shared with me one time that the cannabis and my help allowed her to get her daughter back. She was able to get her daughter and be able to communicate with her daughter, something that she had not been able to do for years. And that we owe to the plant, that we owe to the pioneers that came before me, and
Can we just pick up on that, Joe, if I can, that just to interject to people that Abigail was a wonderful child, and it was only at about 7 years of age that she was cycling her bike to school. She was a normal child, and then the seizures began. So, I mean, that's pretty normal. It was for her condition in retractable epilepsy. So for it to only kick in then. And so Deborah will always say that it's the very moment when you catch the first seizure, that's when we got to really be getting the prescriptions in.
Right,
So,
because unfortunately, a lot of countries and even states in the United States require that you fail on so many anti-epileptic drugs before you can consider using medical cannabis or even CBD, low THC, high CBD. And so because of that law, I will get children coming to me that have been given anywhere between 2 and 5 anti-epileptic drugs, and they still are having 200 to 300 seizures a day, 50 to 100 seizures a day, which is unheard of. That's ludicrous to have somebody be that ill and that bad. That's not fair. It's truly
And
disgusting.
every seizure, Deborah says that she's in fear her child is can actually die during one of these seizures. So every seizure is that dramatic for the family and the people around the patient. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. And so that being said, the fact that these children are going through this type of trauma and the family is living on eggshells because they don't know when the hammer is going to drop. They don't know when their child is going to meet their demise or when they're going to have the seizure or how long the seizure is going to last. One of my pediatric patients got to the point he was diagnosed at between 3 and 6 months of age. um, uh, Bruno. I've spoken of him many times as well, and he was one of those that was between 200 and 300 seizures a day. He had gotten to the point where no human anti-epileptic drug was working for him, and they started experimenting with him using animal anti-epileptic drugs. They were giving him seizure medications that they give to dogs. Could you imagine giving your child a medication that's given to a dog?
Shocking, you know.
And
And
and this
there's
is an
also
industrialized country. This is one of the 30 industrialized countries in the world, and we're treating children with animal medication before you would give them a plant, before you would give them cannabis. And then when she decided to give him cannabis, the amount of the judgment that mother received. Oh, you need to be careful. There's not enough research. Well, how much effing research existed in giving a dog anti-epileptic drug to a child? How much research do you have? This was a Hail Mary pass for those of you that follow American football. It's
yeah.
it's a last ditch effort. How much research, how many studies have you done using that drug on a child? But yet, there have been studies done in Israel, Avidecal in particular. There's a product line in Israel called Tikkun Olam. I get no money from these people. This is just a product that is available to us in the US, in Florida. And the company's name is Tikkun Olam, which means to heal the world, in translated from Yiddish to English or Hebrew to English. And the name of this one particular product is a 15-to-1 CBD to THC ratio. It's called Abidecal, named after a child that was suffering with seizures. And it was interesting because I was speaking on autism and epilepsy in Rome, Italy, back in 2019. And I'm speaking on this topic, and there was a lady in the audience that was smiling and nodding, and it caught my eye. And when you're a speaker and you're looking for any type of reaction from people, and so her reactions were so over the top that I stopped my lecture and I looked to her and I said, "What do you know about this product, or what do you know about this study?" And she started smiling and she said, "I am a psychiatrist in Israel, and many of my pediatric patients were involved in that clinical trial, in that study." And she said, "And I'm familiar with that boy." And I stopped my lecture and I invited her to come join me on stage. And I said, "Well, since you were part of the study, why don't you come up here and speak to the people on your experience as a healthcare professional in Israel managing children that were being treated and studied with this product?" And immediately the audience they were captivated before. Now they were at the edge of their seats because they were actually getting it from the fountainhead. But yet,
Absolutely.
the world continues to believe and push and promote and lie that there's not enough studies, not enough research.
Yes, it's a tragic reality that's pervasive, and it's still pervading. That's the issue in different countries, and in this my own country, Ireland, we still have. I was watching a health committee report that we had some time ago, and there was one of the clinicians on the body that was in that. It was like a health committee. So one of the clinicians was a pediatric clinician, and so what he said that he would never, and like he just said it kind of straight out, I would never prescribe anything like this without like just for like I don't know where that comes from. How can you if there is studies, there is all of this. The evidence is kind of building all the time, and he just discounted it. So we have a barrier. We still have barriers, and
And it's sad, because the ones that are suffering, as we say in the US, the ones that get the shitty end of the stick are these children and these parents that are unable to help their children and are watching their children suffer on a daily basis because of this stigma, of this bias, of this prejudice that exists with a simple plant, because it's
unbelievable.
nothing more than a plant that you extract oil from and you give it to somebody and you are stimulating a system in their body. The endocannabinoid system is related to every function in the human body. It goes from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet, from the skin all the way into the deepest, most atom cell in your body. There are cannabinoid receptors in your white blood cells. There are cannabinoid receptors in your lungs, in your brain, in your spinal cord, on your skin, in your sex organs. Really, people? Like,
Yeah. And we know this. We know this, it's so
this is not
infuriating.
anecdotal. This is not, wives' tales. This is not fairy
Exactly.
tale. Even though I
But
live in Orlando where, we have Disney World, the
yeah,
the
Mickey
the
Mouse.
the Mickey Mouse. This isn't Mickey Mouse medicine.
So and it's like we all Deborah is one mother, we also have another mother that was going through almost it's not simultaneously, but her name is Vera Toomey, and that lives down in Cork, down in another end of the country, and she lives down in a place called West Cork, very beautiful part of the world, West Cork, and but it's a long, long way from Dublin. And at the time when we were getting no joy out of any politician or anything that was happening, Vera had to literally she walked the whole way, I think 350 miles, the whole way from her house in West Cork to the Leinster House, which is our Parliament in Dublin, and just to get people. She also spoke in the House of Commons at different times, but they were going almost at parallel at the same time. Deborah had and so you came into Deborah's life. When did that happen?
The dates evade me, but I seem to recall that she and I started having conversation in before, right around COVID. So 2020, 2019, because 2019 was my signature year. That was the year that my book was published. And so I did a book tour around the world. So I traveled to, as I mentioned, Rome, Italy. I traveled to Tokyo, Japan, Mexico City, Mexico, Medellin, Colombia, Fiji, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, um, Bangkok, Thailand, and Chiang Mai, Thailand. Um, so I had been doing a lot of interviews that year. I had been doing a lot of public speaking that year. And so I believe it was 2019, 2020 ish that Deborah reached out to me. Um, I may be incorrect, but I know that it was right around that time because I remember one conversation she and I had had, and I was coming out of one of my offices, and I remember that I started working at that specific location in 2021. So it was in and around in the midst of COVID, where I was doing more interviews and more speaking virtually on Zoom. And I think she may have heard one of my talks that I did on a 420 weekend or something like that. And and also because of the work I had done with Canna Moms, which is a support group in the US
Uh-huh.
for special needs parents. of children that suffer with seizures or cancer, and they advocate for these children to obtain and have cannabis. And so through my work with Canna Moms and in Spanish Cana Madres, because I'm bilingual by culture, and so I was working the Cana Madres, which is the equivalent of Canna Moms, but just for Latin American, Central America, South America. And I believe it was through those channels that Deborah was able to reach out to me through WhatsApp, first through Facebook, social media, and then we connected through WhatsApp. And we
And
would,
fair play to her. That's the mother looking for any possibility and doing her having, you know, it's not she's not passed over to you. Do you know what I mean? Like I find that extraordinary. You know that this is what people
oh
they're
no, the due
desperate.
diligence that these mothers have, women are the true pioneers. They're the ones because they'll do anything, the love of a mother for their child. They'll do
Right.
whatever it takes for their child and for their family. And so, hats off to all the special needs mothers. But, in this case, Deborah, obviously, because she reached out to me and she was truly at her wit's end. She was in hysterics and she was crying from happiness because she was able to get a hold of me, but she was also crying of pain because of what her daughter was going through. And she shared with me that she had, this product and they had access to this product, but unfortunately no one was able to dose her and the medications that she was on. And so I told her, my usual story, look, I can only give you a general overview based on what I do here. We don't have those products here, but I am familiar with how they work. Nonetheless, if I can get permission to manage and treat Abigail, I would certainly do so. She advocated with the hospital. She went to the specialists that were treating and managing Abigail. They all were on board with allowing me to work with Abigail, and that's where it all really took form. And that's where Deborah got her
I would
Abby
just
back.
like to interject there because this will go out to a lot of Irish audience, and it's not every hospital that was open to this idea. And so this was particularly, I think, because Deborah is a strong, loud woman, a strong border woman, you
Quite
know,
loud.
that loud, you know, so you won't shut her up. So I think Abigail at that time was in Drogheda, and so Drogheda were particularly open to the idea, whereas in Dublin, I think St. Vincent's and a few hospitals down there, there was more barriers in certain hospitals in Ireland, and I find I have multiple sclerosis. I don't know if you're aware of that, but
Yes, I am.
yeah, so I've been through a lot of different parts of the Irish system, and Ireland is still our hospitals are somehow they're quite religious, and there's a lot of barriers within the hospital systems. And I've had my requests for MCAP program. We have a program, MCAP program, refused, just straight out refused for 5 years. I don't have spasticity. I've got chronic pain. So chronic pain doesn't qualify within this restrictive program that is pretty useless. So it is really a hospital to hospital kind of scenario. So but I'm sure that Deborah will be quite a forthright character appearing at the door of your hospital.
And so because of our different, the time differences between
Sure.
Dublin or Ireland and the eastern portion of the United States, we had to be very instrumental in how we coordinated our conversations and our consultations. But it all worked out for the greater good. And
Fantastic.
once we started incorporating the cannabis and started weaning her off of some of the anti-epileptic drugs that she was on, that's where Abigail really came into her own. And that's where Deborah made the statement, I got my Abby back. I was able
Right.
to get in touch with my daughter again, where Abigail began to communicate and verbalize and not only do so, but was able to communicate with the whole family. And so that, in essence, brought the whole family together. And again, the quality of life. And then, as with every chronically debilitating condition, Abigail did. Obviously, her poor body could not fight any longer and started deteriorating. But in the last few months, weeks, days prior to her transition, she was very peaceful, very calm. There was no lashing about. There was
Look beautiful, like a proper teenage girl, and
she was just
looking,
like a little angel, just an absolutely
and
gorgeous.
it's
And but it was what was beautiful one time. I'll share this story. Uh, Deborah would send me snippets of Abigail's progress, also of her seizures. How like
right.
I would see Abigail seizing, she would record her, and one time she was in conversation with Abigail, and she was recording Abigail, and there was a Deborah had a picture of myself uh, next to Abigail's bed, and and so she would say she would talk to Abigail and say hello to Dr. Joe, say hello to your doctor, and she would look over at the picture and would look at the picture and point and smile, and then back at the camera and wave and say say hello to Dr. Joe, wave to
Wow.
Dr. Joe, and so when I still have those recordings on my phone, and it's like just very touching to see this child that was nonverbal, non-communicative, to be able to engage and be engaged with her mother.
Right. Well, you had the bravery to make that happen in your practice, and then to be able to give this gift to other people like Deborah. It is extraordinary, and your work is extraordinary, and we can never underplay that. So I was around then, well, not around, but talking. I would have been talking a lot with Deborah, and because it was when it became inevitable that Abigail, she'd fought so far, but now she was palliative care was looming, and so I would have been in touch with Deborah in that time. And so what she kind of said, but this was the moment where she just, because she knew she had Abigail had her oils right until the end, and they were able to bring it into the palliative care situation, which is a real thing as well to get out in this call, is that this is end of life, that that these oils can make such a difference to not just the people, the family, because the family are witness to all of these things. And I couldn't believe the kind of calmness about Deborah going into that, into she knew the inevitability that she was losing her daughter, it was going to happen, and but the fact that she was able to be so calm, and she totally accepted. So that's kind of like the last call I have on this podcast with her was that, it was in those moments where she's going, she would say to me before that call off the air, this is it, Stephen, and it's kind of, we've come this far, but now I'm so happy to that we have our oils, and she leaves this world a peaceful child, as she should. And so you have that, and so thank you for that work. And it's incredible what you do, and it's an incredible plant we have, like you say, plant medicine.
But it's still
That
a challenge, and I'll share with you our numbers in the state of Florida. We
Please
have
do.
we have 55,000 licensed physicians in this state. We have 55,000 individuals, men and women, that are physicians in the state of Florida. Of those 55,000, only 2,500 are certified to recommend cannabis in the state of Florida.
Wow,
That's less than 1%.
it's a long way to go, huh? Really
There
is.
are over just slightly over a million uh, medical cannabis patients in the state of Florida. We're right at that million mark. There are 22 million people living in the state of Florida.
Wow.
And every day I start anywhere between 5 and 10 new patients. Every day I start brand new patients, and many of them will come in and say, I didn't know anything about this until a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, when a friend of mine saw me suffering, or I was complaining to somebody about not being able to sleep, or I was complaining to somebody about, the fact that I have cancer. and they, you know, was having all this pain, and I don't want to be on narcotics. And they're like, well, why don't you consider medical marijuana? Like, is that legal in Florida? I get that conversation, and I've been fighting the fight here since 2014. That's 10 years, people.
Yeah.
I've been at it, and people will come into my office brand new patient, and they'll tell me, I just heard about this a month or 2 months ago, and I'm scratching my head going, I got to do better.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, just on that note, and because I'm very conscious of your time, is that I'm going to put this under as many Irish physicians, and I'll put it under the Irish Epilepsy Societies, all the different societies that need to see this and need to understand that this is what's possible here and what the barriers we are experiencing and that we're tolerating to a large extent. So, I mean, what would give us a message to our physicians in Ireland? I mean, because it is difficult for them to kind of step over the line and become prescribers, and there would be an awful lot of we have a very kind of claim culture where there's a lot of insurance kind of issues that individual doctors and consultants will have a very, they'll be skeptical. But I mean, what would be your encouragement to them, or what would you say to them, please?
Interesting you say that. One of my Masonic brothers and golfing brothers and Masonic brothers and golfing buddies, his wife needs medical cannabis. She's got a qualifying condition and she needs medical cannabis. I won't divulge any information. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
And they were having a conversation. He and his wife were having a conversation, and her exact words were, "Until my insurance company pays for it, I'm not going to do it, because if I pay for insurance, for health insurance, my health insurance should be responsible for paying for all of my medicine."
Right.
So it's not only the physicians that are dealing with this insurance, it's the patients that pay a premium, a monthly premium to have this coverage, and their insurance refuses to pay for not only this medicine, but many medicines. But to answer your question, I will end it with the way I end every one of my interviews, and that is with the following phrase: cannabis is medicine. That's the message to all your healthcare providers, all your healthcare listeners, all of your politicians. Cannabis is medicine. It is time for everyone to stop thinking about cannabis as being the clandestine drug that people use behind, underneath the bleachers, in a dark alley, um, eating, fast food, eating junk food, and playing video games. That's not the medical cannabis user. The medical cannabis user in the United States is a baby boomer, is an individual that was born between 1946 and 1964. That is the number one clientele. That's the highest incidence of new patients are in that range. I start 70-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 69-year-olds on a daily basis because they are sick and tired of being sick and tired and having to take 10 to 20 pills a day just to be able to function. And when they come into my office, like I saw one yesterday who had come in after his 7-month initial trial, he comes in and I'm going through all of his medications, and he says, "Oh, I'm no longer on diclofenac. Oh, I'm no longer on tizanidine. I'm no longer on cyclobenzaprine." Okay, diclofenac is an anti-inflammatory. Tizanidine is a muscle relaxer. Cyclobenzaprine is a muscle relaxer. I'm no longer on those medications. I'm no longer on tramadol, which is a synthetic narcotic, an opiate. I'm no longer taking oxycodone, which is a narcotic. I'm no longer taking anti-anxiety medications. I've replaced all of that with the medical cannabis.
Powerful.
That is what I live for. The first paper I published on January 6th of 2019 was a case study of a 45-year-old female at that time who was taking between 42 and 58 pills per day.
Wow.
And within 3 months, she was down. 3 months, she was down to 3 pills per day. And today, I started her in 2018. Yeah, I started her in February of 2018 is when she started. In January of 2019, I published her case and I did a follow-up addendum to that presentation a few years ago. And today, she is on 0 medications. All she uses is her medical cannabis.
How about that? Look, I'm gonna leave it there because it's just that's the powerful message that I was looking for, that I want to get out to Irish clinicians and Irish kind of. We still have like the bodies that like the association for patients are still there. Like there's all sorts of levels to barriers that we have still, and so that's the message, man. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for everything that you've done for my friend Deborah and for that beautiful girl, and even the message goes out to Vera Toomey. You know that will see this as well. It's the different. They're both the two different types, Dravets and Gestalt, and so that's what those two kids. But even though they are the two different types of retractable epilepsies, both of them had the same amazing effects with cannabis, and so this is irrefutable. They're living examples of like the mothers are there, and in all these, that's the thing. That's the real tragedy I feel as well, because it's like Abigail had sisters, you know, and she had like there's a family. There's a and the Barrys down in Cork have the same. There's families around all of these cases, and it often gets lost, I think, because you know, people discount the care and discount the people around all of these cases. Horrific. What do you say? 200 seizures a day. Come on. And there's another case. We also have the extraordinary. I'll take a little bit more of your time.
No,
But
that's fine.
we have another extraordinary thing in Ireland, because we've got two jurisdictions on this one island. So we've got in the north of Ireland, we've got the UK. So the UK, and that was all. The UK has legalized medical cannabis, and that came about with another kid, Billy, and so that's what led to legalization of cannabis in the United Kingdom, and so it's only from where Deborah lives in Dundalk to Belfast. This is like an hour. You know, she would only live. You know, she's beside the border, and it's ridiculous that we have on an island, a tiny island, we have two jurisdictions, and we have these two jurisdictions have these two different legalities.
Yeah,
That's
it's
so
almost
nuts.
as ludicrous as having 50 states,
You're
but
shit.
it be legal in one state and not be legal in another state, and
Oh,
have different levels of legality within the 50 states. So yeah, we are the United States, but each state is its own country. It's so, and even within the state, you've got memorandums and moratoriums where they do not allow for the opening of dispensaries. In the state of Florida, there are certain cities and counties that won't allow the opening of a medical cannabis dispensary because it goes against their laws and bylaws. So we have much to do. And because there's much to do, I just want to remind all of the politicians and physicians in Ireland and anyone that hears this that I have a passport, that it is an active passport, and I am willing and able to travel.
we're going to get you over. Don't worry about that. And that's in the cards. And there's another, just the last thing on the politician. We had a guy in Germany, Lauterfag, and it just proves that he's a German politician. So it proves that one guy with the moral courage to stand up and ask for legalization to happen in his country, to remove the damage that prohibition does, all the gang violence and all the rest of it. There's so much negativity around cannabis that is nothing to do with the plant. It's to do with is the prohibition of the plant. So what that one guy was able to, Karl Lauterbach, And he decided, you know what, let's make this thing legal and take the money away from the gangs. And they did that. And on April the 1st, there's a level of legalities coming into Germany. And we hope it'll spread out into the EU. The dominoes will fall because it's a pretty big domino, the German one. I'm
Well,
done with your time. I'm done taking your time, dude.
I'd
Thank you
be more
so
than
much.
happy to do whatever I need to do to get this message out because that's my mission. And one last shameless plug. My 5-year-old child is wanting to be in anyone's home that is willing to accept her. The book is Hope and Healing, The Case for Cannabis, available through Amazon, as well as 6 other books that I have published, one of which is specific in particular to epilepsy and cannabis, and another book that may interest you and your individuals with MS is cannabis and multiple sclerosis. So I've written specific books on those conditions. So, and if you want to get a hold of me, my personal email address, you heard that here, is info@joesphrosado.md.com. That's info@joesphrosado.md.com. I'm sure you'll put all the links below.
Sure, I will. And while you look dashing in the dicky bowl, I said at the beginning that you looked like you just stepped off an awards ceremony, which I'm sure you're always geared up for. But I think you need a cape, dude. You know, and you need a similarly dashing cape.
Funny you should mention that. I'll end with this funny story. 2 stories. First story: when I was in training, I had my glasses at that time were kind of squared, rectangular.
Right.
And one of the professors said that I looked like Clark Kent. And I said, yeah, I'm Clark Kent until I put on my lab coat and then I become Superman. And so that was the joke.
Right.
The reason for the bow tie is in honor of my first pediatric patient, Juju, the gentleman I spoke of earlier, the 15-year-old with the cancers, because his MO was he would always wear a bow tie and a baseball cap. And so whenever I speak on the topic of cannabis, I wear a bow tie in his honor because he was the first child that I was ever able to make a recommendation for.
Come on, let's leave it there, dude. Thank you so much for your time. That's been awesome. And thank you so much, everybody. Subscribe to the channel. Do all of those things. All the links to everything will be in the description. So please do that.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.